It all started with a small, almost forgettable act of kindness, just a fleeting moment in the middle of a city that never seemed to slow down. No one could have predicted that this brief encounter would set off a chain of events that would reunite a broken family, inspire a movement, and change lives in ways no one saw coming. But sometimes, life has a way of turning the ordinary into something extraordinary. Cleveland was its usual self that day, horns blaring, people rushing past each other, conversations blending into the steady hum of city life. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows over the streets, while the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery mixed with the exhaust fumes of the never-ending traffic. The sidewalks bustled with people, businessmen on their phones, teenagers laughing as they walked home from school, and mothers hurrying their children along. And then there was Leonard. He sat with his back against the rough brick wall of a rundown convenience store, his fingers curled into his sleeves to fend off the lingering chill of the afternoon air. He was 42, though years of hardship had aged him beyond his time. For nearly a year, the streets had been his home, a cruel turn of fate after losing his job, battling health problems, and watching his life unravel one painful piece at a time. Leonard shivered against the biting winter wind, his worn layers doing little to keep him warm. He watched as shoes of every kind passed him. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Most people didn't even glance his way. But then, something unusual happened. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopped just feet away from him. They weren't just expensive. They were the kind only someone young and privileged would wear. Leonard looked up, squinting against the sunlight. Standing there was a teenager, tall and composed, his hands tucked casually into the pockets of a sleek jacket. Leonard recognized the face but couldn't quite place it. The boy was scrolling through his phone, seemingly unaware of the whispers and phone cameras pointed in his direction. Leonard hesitated. He wasn't one to approach strangers, but something about the boy's calm demeanor struck him. Taking a deep breath, Leonard spoke up, his voice dry from the cold. "Hey, young man, can you spare $1?" The boy froze mid-scroll, his head tilting slightly as if to confirm he'd heard correctly. Slowly, he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world around them seemed to slow down. Leonard braced himself for rejection. He was used to it. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. "What do you need it for?" the boy asked, his voice calm but firm. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't dismissive or rude. It carried a weight as if the boy genuinely wanted to know. Leonard's throat tightened. He hadn't expected a conversation. "Well," he began, rubbing his hands together for warmth, "a cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich, if I'm lucky." The boy stepped closer, his phone now forgotten in his pocket. Leonard could feel the stares of others, the silent judgment of people wondering why someone like this kid would waste his time on a man like him. Leonard wanted to shrink away, but the boy's gaze held him there. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy nodded slightly. "I'm Barron." There was no arrogance in his tone, no sense of self-importance, just an unexpected sincerity. The air between them felt charged, as if this brief moment would lead to something far greater. Barron crouched down to meet Leonard at eye level, a move that startled him. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his tone calm but direct. Leonard hesitated. Sharing his story wasn't something he usually did. People didn't care about the why, only the spectacle of his misfortune. But there was something disarming about Barron's demeanor. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted. "Lost my job after the plant shut down. Then my health took a turn. Couldn't keep up with rent. It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his eyes narrowing slightly, not out of judgment, but focus. It was a look Leonard wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and concern. What about family? Barron asked. Leonard's jaw tightened. Don't have much of that anymore. My folks passed years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in ages. He chuckled bitterly. Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all. Barron was quiet for a moment, as if weighing Leonard's words carefully. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had asked for $1. Just one. But when Barron's hand emerged, he wasn't holding a single bill. It was a crisp $100 note. Here, Barron said, extending the bill toward him. This should cover more than coffee. Leonard stared at the money, stunned. Are you serious? He finally managed to ask, his voice cracking. Why would you do that? Barron shrugged lightly. Because I can. The simplicity of his answer left Leonard speechless. But before he could respond, Barron leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a softer tone. But listen, this isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something. What's that? Leonard asked, gripping the bill like it might vanish. If I help you today, Barron said, his expression serious, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal? Leonard felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just handing him a lifeline. They were challenging him to climb out of the hole he'd fallen into. He nodded, unable to find the right words. Good, Barron said, standing back up. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, his calm demeanor unshaken by the attention. Then he reached into his pocket again, pulling out a pen and a small notepad. Scribbling something quickly, he handed the torn piece of paper to Leonard. Go to this address tomorrow morning. They'll help you out. Tell them Barron sent you. Leonard unfolded the note, his hands trembling slightly. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center, one he'd heard of but had always been too proud or too ashamed to visit. I'll make sure they're expecting you, Barron added, his voice unwavering. As Barron turned to leave, the crowd parted for him, their whispers growing louder. Leonard watched him disappear into the city, his figure blending into the stream of people. For the first time in years, Leonard felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost. Hope. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the address Barron had given him. It was a modest brick building with a sign that read, Hope Outreach Resource Center. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up from her desk. How can I help you today? Leonard hesitated before pulling out the note and sliding it across the counter. Barron sent me. Said I should come here. Her eyes flicked to the paper, and a knowing smile spread across her face. Ah, you must be Leonard. We've been expecting you. She stood and motioned for him to follow. Come on, let's get you started. The next few hours passed in a blur. Leonard met with a caseworker who listened to his story without judgment, outlining a plan to get him back on his feet. They set him up with a temporary bed in their shelter, arranged for a doctor's appointment to address his health issues, and even connected him with a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Leonard felt like the pieces of his life were being picked up and carefully put back together. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Barron's gesture had begun to ripple far beyond what either of them could have imagined. A video of their interaction, taken by a bystander, had gone viral overnight. It spread across social media like wildfire, with headlines praising the young Trump heir's unexpected act of generosity. The footage showed Barron kneeling beside Leonard, handing him the money, and speaking words of encouragement that struck a chord with millions. Some called it a publicity stunt, while others argued it was a rare display of genuine compassion from someone in a position of privilege. Regardless of the debates, one thing was clear. The video had captured something raw and powerful. People from all walks of life began reaching out to Hope Outreach Resource Center, offering donations and support. Inspired by Barron's actions, they wanted to be part of something bigger. Leonard had no idea his story was now at the center of a national conversation. He was too busy focusing on the steps ahead, attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, and learning to believe in himself again. By the end of the week, Leonard began to notice subtle changes, both within himself and in the world around him. At the shelter, staff members treated him with a kindness he hadn't felt in years. They offered not just practical support, but also encouragement, reminding him that his story wasn't over yet. Word of his journey had spread quietly within the shelter community. Others who had been struggling in silence came up to him, inspired by his willingness to take the first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man said, giving Leonard a pat on the back. The gesture, simple as it was, filled Leonard with an unfamiliar sense of pride. Outside the shelter, however, Leonard's story was no longer quiet. The video of his interaction with Barron Trump had exploded across social media, racking up millions of views in just a few days. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting every detail. Commentators debated whether Barron's actions were genuine or performative, while viewers around the country shared their thoughts online.